Welcome to Returning to Soul, a podcast for lawyers and other high achievers seeking deeper meaning, purpose, and fulfillment in their work and lives. My name is Jessie Brown. I practiced law for 15 years before becoming a career alignment coach and purpose guide for lawyers and other high achievers. I also work as a meditation teacher, a breathwork facilitator, sound healer, and forest bathing guide. In this podcast, we explore what it means to return to our soul, to discover and live our true purpose. My guest today is Jonathan Lowsley. Jonathan and I met about 4 years ago at the Mindfulness Coaching School. And Jonathan and I are also both purpose guides in training with the Purpose Guides Institute. Today, Jonathan and I are going to explore the topic of the first and second arc of life, as Michael Meade describes this in his book, Awakening the Soul. Michael Meade describes the first arc of life as beginning at birth and including the experiences of growing up, becoming independent, developing a career, starting a family, and finding our place in the world. The first arc tends to be externally focused on achievement and accomplishing goals. We also tend to look outside ourselves for guidance and approval. The second arc of life begins when we sense a longing for something deeper. The tasks of the first arc of life no longer fully satisfy. The things we valued in the first arc, such as status or approval, even prestige, these may feel irrelevant. We begin turning within to seek self-knowledge and develop greater self-awareness. We become interested in discovering our true nature at the depths of our being. We long to know our soul's purpose and our unique way of serving and contributing in this world. We can think of the first arc of life as the outer arc and the second arc of life as the inner arc. The second arc is all about returning to soul. So, Jonathan, in addition to starting a family, my first arc of life involved pursuing academic achievement, social status, professional success as a lawyer, financial security, and athletic goals as a competitive cyclist. I'd love to hear a bit about your first arc of life.
Yeah, and thank you, Jessie, for having me on to speak about this important topic. And yeah, like you said, our first arc of life begins at birth and is all about this outer movement, this outer going out into the world to make something of ourselves, to make a life. And so for me, that was all about being independent, being on my own, feeling financially stable and secure, attaining good jobs, good promotions, having a good title, and being seen as successful by the definitions of our society, the society that I live in. And so, yeah, my first arc of life was all about that, going out into the world and also settling down. There was something really important to me about being permanently in a place instead of moving around after college and living in many different places, and having a mortgage and a house, and spending time with a partner, and making a decision to spend our lives together, and all of those decisions were really important to me in the first half of life, and attaining or getting to that place where I was able to do all of those things and to accomplish all of those goals and to feel settled and to feel successful.
Thank you for sharing that. And your story of your first arc of life shows that, we don't want to look down on the first arc of life. It's part of a healthy development, and you accomplished so many wonderful things during that first arc of life.
Yes, and it really was important to me what I was accomplishing, and I was able to serve many people along the way in my in my first career and in my first half of life. And so, yeah, like you said, I want to always honor the first arc of life, and to know that there's parts of it that still exist until death. And so it's
Hmm.
not like the first arc is over. It's still running, and there are still things that are important for me to do in the first arc of life.
Hmm. Yes, I love that. And I know Michael Meade talks about that a bit in his book, where there is some overlap. It's not like a neat linear, the first arc is complete and now we're fully in the second arc and we have abandoned everything from the first arc. We may shed certain aspects from the first arc, but certainly there are things that I would say are, more authentic, more aligned with our soul that we developed in the first arc, perhaps our family relationships, even maybe aspects of our career that we do take with us into the second arc.
Yeah, exactly. Well said.
Well, thank you. So I became dissatisfied with my first arc of life, solely living in that space, and began longing for something deeper and more aligned with my true nature in my late 30s, though I resisted this call for a few more years. So I would say it was really until I turned about 40 that I sort of embraced this inner arc. I'd love to hear a bit about your experience of transitioning from more of that first arc of life focus into the second arc.
Yeah, it's a great question, and one that I think everybody will end up answering differently in their own life. And for me, it was when my life started to crack apart, is one way to put it. In my late 30s, just finally coming face to face with a lot of struggle and challenges that I'd had since my teenage years, and starting to understand how those things were dominating my life, those challenges were dominating my life, and how I was going to need to live differently or change something in order to continue in this world. And so it's almost like that first half of life, or that first arc, just started to unravel, or at least the foundations started to become shaky. And so then, over the course of many years, we start to see like what's trying to come through all of these cracks, and starting to pick up the threads of our life, and understanding what things meant from our childhood, and understanding the personal myth that we had been living all of our lives, to start to tap in and become aware of the second arc of life, which by the way also begins at birth. It's not like it just starts somewhere in the middle of life. It's always there.
Mm.
We just maybe don't tune into it as often when we're younger or less experienced in life, where our focus is entirely on the first arc. And so it's not until we kind of something goes wrong in our life and something starts to fall apart, where we actually get somewhere deeper and start to dig into like why do the things that brought me happiness no longer bring me happiness? Why does it feel like something I used to love now just I'm unmotivated to do it? So these are just threads to follow and to start to bring out that second arc of life.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. And I think it's really important what you shared about these cracks forming during that time. And I'm reminded of how Michael Meade describes this sort of as the soul as like a little seed, of potential, and, how there's like a need for this cracking for the seed to fully develop and grow. And also in what you're sharing, it reminds me of how the challenges, the obstacles, even the crises that we go through can be such an opportunity.
Mm-hmm.
So in our culture, sometimes we're, taught to think of these things as bad or negative or to resist them, but really they can be the gifts that awaken us to, deeper sense of meaning and purpose and our true nature.
Absolutely. Although I would add, for me, I did not see challenges as gifts until until long into the challenge
Yeah,
or like
yes,
after the challenge.
it's
You
true.
know, I'm at a point where I wouldn't change anything that has happened to me in my life. I wouldn't trade away any of the trauma or the despair, the depression, anxiety. I wouldn't trade any of that. But while you're in it, I definitely want to honor the feeling of like anything to make the pain go away.
Absolutely. You're right. I mean, that takes me back to when I was in my own dark night of the soul, one of several, but the one that was in my late 30s. Yeah, in the middle of it, it didn't feel like a gift. It is 2020 that you're like, wow, what a gift. But yeah, that's well said. So I'm curious, Michael Meade talks about as we, whether we say enter the second arc of life or it emerges in us, when we go through this phase, we tend to require slowing down and also creating more space in our lives. And this continues to be true in my life. The need to slow down and make space is a very continual theme in my life. And I'm curious what role slowing down and making space played in your life.
Great question, Jesse. Soul speaks in whispers. Soul speaks in imagery and symbolism, in metaphor, and soul is a felt sense, speaks in emotion, and all of those ways of knowing that I've just listed. It's not easy to hear when you're moving fast. And so just the question itself of inviting us into slowness really reminds me of how soul speaks, and that we just can't hear it when we're action oriented, when we're going out into the world to make a life. It's in the times of slowing down, in the times of rest, in the times in between spaces that we can start to invite soul in. So I love this question. And, you know, for those who are looking for ways to slow down, this isn't the podcast where we talk about like time management strategies.
No.
But, you know, anytime I hear myself or somebody else say the words like, "Oh, I'm so busy right now," what I really hear is like I've been abandoning myself.
Mm,
And if we frame it like that, then it brings us into the awareness of how much slowness and stillness we actually need for ourselves to be able to do this work of the second arc of life. And so, my own slowness is played a huge role in this, learning to wander the land without a destination, learning to sit and hold a question without answering it. These are all practices of the soul. And so I think people need those practices. People need to learn those practices and to be taught those practices. I did not have any soul-centric elders to teach me any of these practices. I'm lucky to have found community and for people and books and authors that resonate with me that have taught me many practices on slowing down and listening to soul. But it's not common. So we need the knowledge and the know-how to do it. We need the space by not abandoning ourselves. I guess maybe the third thing I'll say is just this limiting belief that I have heard so many times as a coach, and a limiting belief that I carry myself, which is I don't have time for that. That's what it sounds like. And it may be a very honest belief. You may not have time for it. And that's okay too. Like the second arc of life is always there. It has always been there, and it will always be calling for you.
mm,
So even if it's not today or this week or this year, you
mhm,
know, the second half of life, the second arc is waiting, it's listening, it's calling, it's ready for you.
mhm.
So if we just change our mindset to believe that it's there and it's waiting, then maybe it's not about finding the best time or the exact right time. Maybe it's just about making a little bit more space and choosing the second arc in every moment, or in moment to moment, making a choice of first arc or second arc in every moment. So
Mm,
that's how I'm coming to understand this in my own life.
I love that. Thank you so much. And so beautiful to hear how you describe this. And I'm reminded of a couple things. This idea that I think the second arc of life is relational. We're cultivating a deeper relationship with our own soul. And I think of, friendships or even in our marriages, any relationship that we value requires a little bit of quality time, So whatever that looks like for each of us, but it's important. So, and also just to reflect on what you shared about wandering the land without, a destination. I know that when I began those types of practices, it was quite different because I had a very productivity oriented mindset around hiking. Anytime I was out in nature, it was still, I would track my steps and, 5 miles, and I wanted to do it fast and get in a workout and all that stuff. And this is a different way of engaging out in the natural world. Would you agree?
Yeah, absolutely, Jesse. And soul doesn't care about your personal record. Soul doesn't care about steps, destinations, mileage. Soul cares about intuition. It cares about you following what threads are there for you to follow. It's about you really being out in the world and finding play and finding meaning in the authenticity of your own desires and your own longing, and to like Mary Oliver teaches us, uh, let our the soft body animal body love what it loves,
Hmm.
and that's really what soul is about. So I absolutely agree with that. It's hard to put down the linear material world view of how you should take a hike and instead wander with soul. It's hard.
Absolutely. Um, yeah, it's definitely a shift. So, Michael Meade also says that everyone doesn't necessarily go through the second arc of life. He says, this is a quote from him: many people simply grow old and die without awakening to the nature of the divine seed hidden within them. So I'm curious, what cultural conditions do you think contribute to people staying in that first outer arc of life their entire life?
Yeah. Well, I guess the first one I just mentioned is the stupor that everyone finds themselves in, living in a modern world, in a modern society like we have today. There's a stupor, a sleep that we are subjected to, that tries to tell us this is it, that tries to tell us that material possessions and aggregating wealth is the goal of life, and that there's nothing else to it. And so, first, I guess I would highlight what I believe is a falsehood around what life is really all about. And beyond that, I think people have a lot of conditioning in the first half of life, in the first arc of life. It really keeps us safe. There's a great function to our first arc of life, getting us stable in the world and finding security. There's a function to all of that. And yet, when people have the safety and have the security, that's where they may get stuck in
Hmm.
not knowing what's next. And so I really feel like playing it safe and living a life that is too small for us. That's that's really the first arc of life. It's necessary and it has a function, and yet it's not enough for many people.
Hmm. Absolutely. Thank you. That's beautiful. So, you know, another quote from Michael Meade, he says that the ego, or little self, as he calls it, must be set aside long enough for the light of the second arc to shine through and illuminate a genuine life path. So, in your experience, what does setting aside the ego or the little self look like?
Yeah. Um, this is just what's popping into my head, right? The image that I see in my head, and remember, soul speaks in images. The image that I see is not a setting aside of the little self, but of a picking up and embracing the little self. So
Hmm.
that's the image that I'm getting, and so my orientation here to this question even is about like the necessity of the little self. We absolutely need the little self. The ego driven mind is what is here allowing me to speak on this podcast with you, like to make appointments in my calendar and to drive to pick up my kid at school. Like, the ego is very important to all of those things, and yet it can get tricked by believing that it's the boss and that it's the only thing on the earth that matters. And so I think for me, the embracing of the little self is important, because how else can you get it to realize that it's just a raft floating on an ocean. We need to treat that little one with compassion,
Hmm.
because it's a hard realization to come to, that what I thought was really me is just the tiniest, like, tip of the iceberg of the infinite amount of internal authority and authenticity that people have inside themselves. And
Hmm.
so, yeah, that's what it brings up for me. It's just this embracing the little one, because it's difficult to come to that realization.
That's really beautiful, Jonathan, and it, reminds me of internal family systems, which I am a huge fan of, and the notion that we do embrace these parts and with compassion and curiosity, and perhaps get to know if they really have a tight grip on our lives, getting to know their underlying concerns, perhaps their fears, things like that, that still may be keeping them in the driver's seat of our lives.
Yeah. And something else to say about the little self is we absolutely need it
Mm,
for our entire lives. We
mm,
need our little self so much to do the work of soul.
mm-hmm,
See, little self is still the one that does the action in the world.
mm-hmm,
It did the action on the first half of life in the outer arc,
mm-hmm,
moving out into the world. It did all of that action by itself and for itself.
mm-hmm,
And in our second arc of life, in the inner arc, we still need the little self to help us with the work, but
mm-hmm,
it is in service of something way bigger. It's in
mm-hmm.
service of soul and our inner wisdom and our deepest purpose.
Absolutely. So, in my experience, having the ego or the little self become the servant of soul rather than, the leader and the one that's trying to run everything did require me to do some inner healing work, because there were reasons, whether it's big T trauma, little T trauma, or just the challenges and difficulties of life and scary, hard experiences we went through when we were younger. There is a reason my little self, felt it needed to be in control for so long. So I'm curious, in your experience, or just your thoughts on what role that type of inner healing might play in allowing the little self to feel safe enough to let soul lead.
Hmm, beautiful question. And I think the work is really about getting to a place where we have a whole and healthy ego that is stable enough to sustain the second arc of life. And so there are people that I have worked with as a coach that simply are not ready for the second half of life. That's not even what they're thinking about. The cracks have not started to form. And their work is really like the holding and healing work that comes in therapy and that is helps so many people every day. And we never stop that work. Like that continues long into the long into the inner arc of life, continues our own healing journey. It's
Hmm.
not a destination. And yet we need a quorum of wholeness
Hmm.
and of healthy mental habits to take us on the journey of soul, the journey into the inner arc.
Beautiful. Yes. Your notion of a quorum reminds me a bit of what, the founder of internal family systems, Dick Schwartz, he refers to this as like a critical mass of self. So capital S self, to me, is analogous to the soul. And it's not, as you said, it's not that our healing is completely done and now we're totally led by ourself or our soul. It's more that there's a critical mass of self. There's enough healing that's been done. We have enough access to our internal resources to regulate our nervous system, things like that, to be able to do the second, embark on the second arc of life.
And I might add that I personally, as a coach, would disrecommend embarking on the second adventure without a really solid understanding of your own holding and healing. I think
Hmm.
that's really foundational, and it's a dangerous journey. The second arc of life, it can be, and it's risky. It's risky to ego, and so I think it's important that we have that holding and healing first before we uh, move out into this other way of thinking and knowing ourselves.
I agree completely. And, I'm curious to hear your thoughts on this. For me, it's easy in retrospect to look at these phases and stages and almost to feel as if I were choosing, okay, now I'm in the dark night of the soul, and next I'm doing healing and holding. Now I'm embarking on the second arc. But of course, it wasn't like that at all. And it's as though these things unfolded on their own, and I sort of, went with it. And then there was a couple years of deep inner healing work that I was doing. And then it sort of emerged. There was more of a lightness and more of a feeling drawn to exploring the depths. And it was like a natural unfolding. I'm curious if you can speak to that versus this idea that we plan ahead, I'm going to go on this journey or this adventure.
Yeah, yeah, and the little self reads the self-help book with all the personality stages and says, "Oh yeah, I'm right there and I'm here and I'm further along than I really am, and this is what serves me most is to believe that I am, complete with this." And the reality of it is just so messy. It's whether you describe it as a linear journey or a spiral or a fractal or a Jackson Pollock painting, like it's messy, because no two people are the same, and we always have work to do from previous stages of life. That's always just part of the journey that we're in. And so I really do think that it can get messy, and we don't always know where we are. And a great invitation in the second arc of life, in the inner arc of life, the greatest invitation is into the place of not knowing.
Hmm.
The little self is the one that must know. It has to figure it out.
Hmm.
And yet, soul cannot be met in that way. And so, this idea of not knowing becomes really important. And feeling into it, resting in the place of not knowing, becomes really important in the journey of soul.
Mm. Yes, and I'm reminded of this concept from, Buddhism of groundlessness, that kind of
Hmm.
resting in this place of groundlessness, which is certainly not the ego's preference.
No, no, it's uncomfortable.
Yeah.
It's like everything we're talking about here. It can sound amazing, and it is incredible to meet the divine within and to know your inner wisdom. And it is terrifying, and it is hard work. And just want to throw that out there and acknowledge that as well for people.
Yeah, I agree. And because we're talking about, I've heard words like it's messy or it's risky or I don't know if you had said dangerous, but like these types of, and it's hard work. So I agree with all of those things. And I'm curious if you could speak to our listeners about, who might hear all that and be like, well, why would I ever want to go on this journey? Um, I know for myself, I can say the pain of the pain, if we'll call it that, or discomfort of this journey, I would take it any day over the pain of, letting the small self lead my life.
Yes.
So, but I'm curious if you could speak to why our listeners might be interested in going on a journey that, is risky and hard and messy.
Yeah. I think it really has to do with what's serving you in your life. And if your outer arc of life is serving you and you're super happy in your career and you have great relationships and everything is going well for you, then you may not want this. It may not be interesting to you. But to the people who feel like a stranger in their own lives, those are the ones that start to realize that, everything that they have should make them happy, and yet it doesn't. And that lack, that missing piece is really what ushers people in to this second arc of life.
Hmm.
When the first arc doesn't do it anymore for us, when our motivation just drains away from our life and we have no passion for what used to bring us joy.
Hmm.
Maybe in our career, maybe in our relationships, maybe in our even our material possessions,
Hmm.
and just noticing that, and it's that point. Why would people want to undertake the second arc of life? It's really when the first one just isn't working for us anymore. It's just not, it's too small for us.
Hmm.
Say it again. It's just become too small for us, and we don't know what the answer is. It's not a new career. It's not a new job. It's not a new house or a new boat. It's not a new relationship. I mean, maybe, but I think people find ways to ignore the pain that exists in the first half of life instead of realizing, oh, this is really my soul's deepest calling into the second adventure, and that's why things are feeling so painful and stuck for me.
Hmm. Absolutely. Yeah, beautifully said. So I also do career coaching for lawyers, and I think of it as career alignment coaching because it's really aligning their career with their values, their strengths, their natural gifts, who they are, their true nature. And to be transparent, while a career fix or career change is not synonymous with the second arc of life, you and I have both left financially successful, stable careers to follow what we feel are the callings of our soul. But we didn't do that initially. That wasn't the first step or second or third or anything like that. But just to be transparent with our listeners, we've both have made that choice.
Yeah. And it wasn't even the goal for me.
Hmm.
The goal for me was not to have a new career. I didn't
Mm,
want a new career. I liked my career,
mm,
you know? But
yeah.
but the first arc of life just wasn't doing it for me, and there was so many
Hmm.
signposts along the way. Looking back, you can see all the signposts, but um, oftentimes we don't want even a new career. We're like so happy with how things are going, and so it's
Hmm.
not until something really shifted for me that I realized, oh, there's something deeper going on here.
Yeah,
And then, and
absolutely.
then of course after you have the after you start walking the second arc of life, then it's like, oh well, maybe a new career is in order. That's how it
Hmm.
happened for me.
Yeah, I agree. And sometimes, as you've said, this is such an individual journey. And I personally believe that our childhood trauma or unhealed wounds, things like that, can cause us to really deviate in maybe our relationship choices, our career choices, perhaps other choices, because we're living from survival mode. So when we're really motivated from that place of we haven't addressed some trauma and stuff from childhood, our career may be further afield than others. So for me, I know with practicing law, I was really motivated to do that because my parents had died and I had no financial safety net. My mom was a single mom and really struggled financially. So financial success, independence, being able to support myself was my only concern in terms of career. A little bit about status and stuff came in there too, but it wasn't truly aligned with my passions, my interests, my strengths. So I think some folks their career may be further, from their true nature than other people.
Yeah. And I just want to say, Jesse, you would never have, well, I don't know what would have happened, but you wouldn't be here doing a podcast
Yeah, it's
about
true.
soul
It's true.
if you didn't become a lawyer and if you didn't go through all of that in the first arc of life. And so, you know, whether or not they land further away from their career alignment, um, it all works out if you follow the second arc of life.
I totally agree with you. And, when I decided to resign from being a lawyer after 15 years, I wrote a letter to my law career. I didn't show it to anybody, but honoring it for all the gifts, all the growth. There was a lot of good from that 15 years. So it was sort of a ritual of just honoring that time in my life.
Yeah. And when I left my corporate career, at a team meeting, I read a eulogy for my career and spent 30 minutes eulogizing my career. So back to honoring, our
Yeah,
experience and the first arc of life. It's important to recognize how much it meant to us.
absolutely. Absolutely. Um, So, you've used the word adventure a couple times, and I thought maybe we could end this discussion by talking about, Michael Meade describes the second arc of life as the soul's adventure, and you've used the word adventure. So, if you could tell our listeners a little bit about your soul's adventure. You just shared, it started with this eulogy, and you've delved into it a little bit, but I'd love to hear a little more.
Yeah, and maybe just to draw out a little bit more about that word adventure, what comes to mind is the unknown. And you don't have an adventure at the grocery store. You drive there, you like make a list of things to buy. Like that's pretty well known what's going to
Mhm.
happen there. I think the really the thing for adventure is this aspect of not knowing how it's going to wind up, not knowing where we're going, doing something challenging, doing something a little bit scary to us, but something really rewarding. So I think all of those elements are alive for me in that word adventure. And I think the adventure is always there. It's always has been. These different moments in my life, I can see, like being in a forest by myself when I was 8, like, oh, you can just experience the numinous, this adventure of the second arc, not knowing what it is, but just really attuned with soul. And other moments, sunsets that bring you tears, or conversations with a friend that fly by. Like there are just these moments of numinous encounter that we have that really is the arising nature of the second arc. And so it's not for me, it's not hasn't been like one moment in time.
Mm.
There's been several times where it's come up for me and bubbled up for me. And I do think it's an adventure. It's an adventure to keep seeking, to keep following the calling. I don't know where it's going,
Mhm.
but to keep following it, that's the adventure for me. So that's how I'm landing on that question.
I love it. And a couple things comes up, hearing about your experience when you were 8 reminds me of this concept that there are like glimpses of our soul that we experience or we glimpse throughout our life, exactly. And I don't know about you, but for me, I would have a glimpse, and it was transcendent experiences like what you described. So perhaps in nature or at a concert, I had a lot of those kind of peak transcendent experiences, and or a feeling of being in a flow state, being really fully present to something, feeling very alive. But then often that was sort of short-lived. And then I kind of went back into this busy, busy, kind of stressful existence and lost sight of that. And I think now those experiences have I don't know, a larger role in my life. They're more important to me than they were before, if that makes sense. And for me, the sense of adventure also brings into it the idea of feeling like you're a hero on a mission or a quest, or heroine, this kind of idea. But the idea of mission quest and a purpose seem important to me as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And people undertake quests because of their importance.
Hmm.
No one would go on a quest if it wasn't of the most highest importance. And so that's really what soul feels like to me. The calling really feels like there's something really important for me personally about following these threads to the center of my being. And that's worth it. That's worth the quest. That's worth the adventure to me.
I agree. And, you know, this can sound like it's really about our own fulfillment and joy, and that's important too. But I know both of us feel that it's also about discovering our really true gifts so that we can love the world in the best way that we can, so that we can contribute in the best way that we are each individually able to. So there is this internal fulfillment that we experience, but there is also the element of impact and contribution in the world.
Yeah, beautifully said. And ultimately, the call to soul is a call to service.
Hmm.
And serving in the unique and particular way that only
Hmm.
I can serve in my lifetime with my particular and unique set of gifts. And if everybody on this planet lived into purpose and lived in soul and really brought out those gifts in just the right way that is meant, we would all be able to serve our earth and more than human community in just the most amazing and beautiful way.
Mm, beautiful. Thank you. I agree completely. So, on that note, for our listeners who would like to learn more about you, connect with you, learn all the many ways you're serving in the world, how can they find you?
Yeah, thanks, Jessie. Well, my website is deepeningpurpose.com, and you can always find me there or on LinkedIn. I'm Jonathan Lowsley.
Great. Well, we can add links to your website and your LinkedIn profile in the show notes. So, thank you so much for being here, Jonathan. Um, Everyone, thank you for spending this time together with us. This is Returning to Soul. We're so glad you're here. And until next time, be well.